Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive into something pretty fascinating? We're tackling affective computing today.
Yeah, it's where tech meets feelings, you know? Computers that can actually sense how you're feeling. Wild stuff.
And we've got some really cool sources lined up. We're talking Rosalind Picard's book, Affective Computing, that's like the Bible of this whole field.
Totally. Plus, we'll look at the tech side and some real-world examples. Some of it's pretty mind-blowing, honestly.
So this deep dives for anyone who's ever looked at their phone and thought, man, I wish this thing knew what I was going through.
Exactly. It's about making tech that gets us, that understands and reacts to our emotions.
Okay, so Rosalind Picard, back in the 90s, she really put affective computing on the map. What was so groundbreaking about her work?
Well, she basically said that if we want computers to really get us to interact naturally like another person, they need to understand our emotions.
Makes sense when you think about it. Emotions drive everything we do, right?
Totally. How we talk, how we decide things, it all ties back to how we feel.
So she was saying, computers need to be able to feel, too.
Maybe not feel exactly like we do, but at least recognize and process our emotional signals.
How do you even start teaching a computer something that complex, though? Emotions are, so slippery.
Right. So you break it down. Effective computing has these three core parts. First, there's emotion recognition.
Okay, so that's like using sensors and algorithms to pick up on stuff like our expressions or our tone of voice.
Yep. Even physiological signals like heart rate, things like that.
It's almost like giving computers a sixth sense, an emotional sense.
Kind of. It's about recognizing patterns in our behavior, our physiology, that match different emotions. Like when you're angry, your voice changes.
Oh yeah, for sure. I know mine gets all high-pitched when I'm frustrated. What about subtle stuff, though? The emotions we maybe don't even show outwardly.
That's where it gets really cool. There are systems that can detect those tiny, fleeting expressions, micro expressions.
Wow. So once a computer picks up on an emotion, what happens next?
That's where emotion modeling comes in. It's like teaching computers the language of emotions.
So like building an emotional dictionary for computers.
Exactly. You create these models that represent different emotions, kind of like mapping the emotional landscape.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. So the computer detects an emotion, then matches it to this map it has. But what's the point of all this? What are we aiming for?
That leads to the third part, emotion synthesis. This is where machines don't just understand emotions, but can express them too.
Whoa, hold on. We're teaching computers to express emotions. They're going to start emoting all over the place.
Not quite emoting, but think about it. Synthesizing speech with emotional tone, making facial expressions, even using body language.
Okay, now that is seriously cool. All right, but let's back up to the tech itself for a minute. You mentioned computers can detect emotions through stuff like facial expressions, voice analysis, even those physiological signals. Can you break those down a bit more?
Sure. So let's start with facial affect detection. Basically, cameras and algorithms analyze your face to figure out your emotions.
Like those demos where they highlight parts of your face and guess how you're feeling.
Exactly. They're using all sorts of fancy techniques, optical flow, neural networks to read your expressions, looking at raised eyebrows, frowns, smiles, all those little cues.
It's like they're learning to read our faces like a book. But what about body language? We communicate with so much more than just our faces.
Totally. Body gesture recognition is a big part of this too. Posture, hand gestures, even how we walk.
Oh, I'm fascinated by body language, trying to figure out what people's posture is saying about how they're feeling.
Yeah, and computers are starting to do that too. Researchers are using 3D models, appearance-based systems, all kinds of things to understand body language.
This is all pretty mind-blowing, but how accurate is it, really? Can computers actually read us as well as another person can?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it's complicated. Effective computing has come a long way, but there are challenges, like sometimes our expressions don't match how we actually feel.
Oh, tell me about it. I'm a pro at fake smiling through awkward situations.
Right. So that's something researchers are working on. One approach is multimodal recognition, which combines data from multiple sources. So not just your face, but your voice, body language, even physiology.
Like getting a second opinion, but for emotions. But even with all that data, couldn't there still be bias or inaccuracies?
Definitely a risk. That's why it's so important to be careful with this tech. We need diverse data sets, constant checks for accuracy and fairness.
That makes sense. But even with the challenges, the potential applications here are just huge. I'm dying to hear about some real-world examples of effective computing in action. Okay, so we've covered the basics of how computers are getting emotionally intelligent, but I'm ready to see the stuff in action, whereas effective computing actually making a difference out in the real world.
Well, one area where it's already having a big impact is education.
Education, really? Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Imagine a classroom where the computer can tell if a student is struggling or getting bored and then, actually adjust the lesson to help them.
Whoa, hold on. So instead of the teacher trying to read the room and figure out who's getting it and who isn't, the computer could do it for them.
Exactly. There are these emotion-aware tutoring systems being developed that can track a student's face, their eyes, even their heart rate.
That's wild. It's like personalized learning taken to a whole new level. No more kids getting left behind because they're too shy to ask for help or the teacher just doesn't notice they're lost.
Right, and it's not just about catching the kids who are struggling. It can also tell if a student is bored, especially helpful for online learning.
Oh yeah, I've definitely spaced out during my fair share of online courses. But if the computer senses I'm getting bored, what can it actually do?
It could change the pace, maybe introduce some new, more interesting material, or even just suggest taking a quick break.
Yeah.
Keep students engaged.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So effective computing is shaking things up in education, but what about other fields?
Another area with tons of potential is transportation. Imagine if cars could sense when a driver is getting angry and actually intervene before things escalate.
Whoa, that sounds straight out of a sci-fi movie. Are you saying my car could become my, emotional therapist on the road, keeping me from getting road rage?
Well, maybe not a therapist, but yeah, we already have systems that can detect drowsy drivers, right? But imagine that, but for stress, anger, distraction, it could even take control in a dangerous situation.
That's kind of freaky, but also really cool. Makes you think, though, how much control are we willing to give up to our cars?
That's a big question for sure. As this tech gets more advanced, we got to think about that stuff. But the potential benefits are huge, right? Way fewer accidents, maybe even helps us become more aware of our own emotions and how they affect our driving.
Okay, safer roads, smarter classrooms. What about healthcare? How's effective computing being used to actually improve people's health?
Oh man, so many ways.
Yeah.
It could really change healthcare, from diagnosing mental health conditions to providing emotional support. Imagine systems that analyze your face, your voice, to detect signs of depression or anxiety.
Wow. So instead of relying on people to self-report, which can be tough, doctors could have this more objective measure of how someone's really doing.
Exactly. Could be a game changer for mental health, especially for people who have trouble expressing themselves or talking about their feelings.
That's incredible. Are there other ways it's being used in healthcare?
Well, think about virtual companions, providing emotional support, company for people who are maybe chronically ill or isolated.
That's so sweet. I can see how valuable that would be, especially for people who are going through a tough time.
These virtual companions are getting super advanced too. They can hold conversations, learn your preferences, even recommend stuff you might enjoy, like music or movies.
It's like having a friend who's always there for you 24/7 without judgment. But what about people who need more than a virtual friend? Can this technology play a role in traditional therapy too?
Sure. They're even using robots in therapy for kids with autism, helping them learn social and communication skills.
Robots in therapy? Seriously?
Yeah, and these robots are designed to be engaging, interactive. They use expressions, gestures, speech, all in a fun, educational way.
So like a high-tech playmate that's secretly teaching them important skills. But why robots? What makes them so well-suited for this kind of therapy?
Well, robots are predictable. They do the same thing every time. And that can be really helpful for kids with autism who can find human interactions unpredictable and overwhelming.
Makes sense. It's a safe space to practice those social skills without all the pressure. Are there similar applications for adults?
Oh, yeah. Like some therapists use robots to help people with anxiety or PTSD to practice coping strategies in a controlled environment.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to ask, are there any downsides? Ethical concerns we should be thinking about?
We definitely got to be cautious. This is powerful stuff. And like any tool, it can be misused. Privacy, data security, the potential for manipulation, those are all real concerns.
Yeah, I can see that. What if, advertisers start using this to play with our emotions and get us to buy things we don't need?
It's possible, right? As this tech gets more sophisticated, it's super important to protect people's privacy and make sure it's being used ethically, not for harmful purposes.
I completely agree. Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening conversation. Effective computing has the potential to do so much good, but it's up to us to use it wisely.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick pause here. And when we come back, we'll dive into some of the even weirder, more mind-bending aspects of effective computing and what the future might hold for this game-changing technology.
Okay, so affective computing, computers reading our emotions, that's wild enough. But I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. What about the bigger picture? Like, where is all of this heading?
Well, that's where things get really interesting and maybe a little like mind-bending. We've talked about computers understanding emotions, but what about machines actually having emotions?
Whoa, hold on. Now we're getting into, like, Terminator territory, robots with feelings.
Well, maybe not quite like robots crying and stuff, but the idea of emotions in machines, that's something researchers are really looking at.
I can see why. It's a huge question, right? Can a machine really feel things the way we do? Our emotions are so complex, tied up with our experiences or biology.
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about that. Some people think true emotions are just, you know, a human thing, can't be replicated in a computer. Yeah, that makes sense. But others think that as AI gets more advanced, maybe something like emotions could just like emerge.
Yeah, it's possible. One of the big thinkers in this field, Marvin Minsky, he said emotions are basically algorithms our brains use, like mental shortcuts.
So emotions are just another form of like computation. That's a wild thought.
Yeah, and if we can figure out those algorithms, maybe we can put them into machines.
Okay, even if we don't have like robots falling in love anytime soon, thinking about machines and emotions changes how we design tech, right?
Totally. We're already seeing it with these digital humans, these computer-generated people.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. They're crazy realistic.
Right. And the idea is that they can interact with us more naturally, more engagingly, could be used for customer service, therapy, all kinds of things.
It's like always having someone to talk to, someone who gets you, but it's also a little bit creepy, blurring the lines between real and not real.
Yeah, it's definitely something we have to think about. As this tech gets better, we'll need rules, boundaries, figure out what's okay and what's not.
This whole deep dive has been incredible. Effective computing, I mean, it's mind-blowing. Emotion detecting cars, virtual therapists.
It's powerful stuff, that's for sure.
And it has the potential to change the world in so many ways.
But we got to be careful, right? Use it wisely.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking us on this journey into effective computing. I know I learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners did too.
Glad to be here.
And to everyone listening, keep those brains buzzing. Think about the questions we've raised today. What does it mean for machines to understand our emotions? What happens when they start expressing them too? This is just the beginning, and it's up to all of us to shape the future of this incredible technology. Until next time, happy diving.